Well, it's time to revise. Hey everybody, how's it going? I hope your revision is going smoothly. Welcome back. It's another Revise With Me video where you get to see some exam questions, you get to pause, have a go, and come back, and I'll talk through. It's memory today, AQA Paper 1, and we're going to be looking at the cognitive interview. So, let's do it. Okay, there they are. Look, there's some exam questions. Here's your chance to pause, come back when you're ready, and I'll talk through. Okay, let's do it. Command word is identify. So, you don't need to explain, you're just going to tell me context reinstatement or mental reinstatement, report everything, change the order, change perspective. Done. The next one is a little application question, but it's just a 1 mark identify question. So what's going on here? If we're recalling it from a different witness's point of view, that should sound to you like change perspective. Easy 1 mark. Okay, 3 marks for outlining the cognitive interview. I'd probably start with a general kind of, the cognitive interview is an evidence-based technique designed to increase the amount of information recalled by witnesses, and then just explain a couple of techniques. You could do all 4 for 6 marks, but for a 3 mark, just do a couple. So, something like this. It uses a range of techniques, including mental reinstatement, which is where an officer encourages or supports the recall of witnesses by encouraging them to think about internal and external cues at the event. Yeah, so they have to mentally put themselves back there. And what else could we say? Let's go for change perspective. Why not? Another technique used is change perspective. This is where an officer will encourage the witness to recall the event from someone else's point of view, such as, another witness or the attacker or the victim if they weren't the victim. Okay, for 3 marks, that's fine. Right, explain how the cognitive interview differs from a standard police interview. Well, a couple of points to make here. You could talk about how it's based on psychological research. You could talk about how we don't use leading questions in a cognitive interview, but a standard one typically does or did. You could talk about how the officer is there to kind of, support the witness and kind of facilitate them telling the officer the details, as opposed to going in with an agenda and kind of taking control. Yeah, so you could talk about the witness having more control. You could talk about allowing the witness to talk more, using open questions, that sort of thing. There's plenty of ideas there, okay? Key thing, probably, evidence-based and no leading questions. Okay, a little STEM question here. We need to explain 2 techniques, referring to Jerry and what's going on there. So, have a little read through. We're thinking, okay, I need you to think about that day. Fine, that's a bit generic. The next bit is important though, isn't it? So what was the weather like? So it's getting Jerry to think about, what was going on externally on the day. And how did you feel? So that's getting Jerry to think about what's going on internally. Well, that feels like, external and internal cues. So this is tapping into context and state-dependent forgetting. That technique, as I'm sure you know by now, is mental reinstatement, or reinstate the context. So for half this response, so for 3 marks, we're going to talk through what that means with a link to the STEM. So, context reinstatement, or one technique used in the cognitive interview, is context reinstatement. This is where an officer encourages a witness to mentally put themselves back at the scene of the crime by tapping into or by using internal and external cues. This is seen in the scenario when Jerry is asked to think about how they feel and what the weather was like. So obviously that's internal and external. It's used in this way because those cues will hopefully trigger further information. Okay, that's that bit done. Keep reading. Can you tell us what you remember? A little bit generic. Don't worry if you think it's silly or irrelevant. Okay, so there, what we're doing is we're encouraging Jerry to tell us everything that he remembers, even if it's irrelevant. So that's the report everything, isn't it? So for the second half of this response, a second technique used in the cognitive interview is report everything. This is where the officer will encourage the witness to recall all the information that they can, even if they don't think it's important or relevant. This is seen in the scenario when Jerry is encouraged to recall, even if he thinks it's silly. There you go, done. Right, explain one limitation. For a 3 mark evaluate one, we're looking for kind of a peel kind of answer. So what could we go for? Let's do one limitation of the cognitive interview is the practical difficulties. Delivering a cognitive interview requires specialist training, which costs the police time and money, and therefore some might argue that the costs of the cognitive interview outweigh the benefits. There you go, done. Okay, similar this time. Obviously it's a strength, not a limitation, but you still want that kind of, point, explain, conclude, or peel structure to your evaluation, but we're discussing a strength. So discuss obviously means, present both sides of it. So we're going to start with a strength, and we're going to deliver some kind of counter argument to that strength, yeah? We're kind of evaluating the strength. So what should we do? One strength of the cognitive interview is that research supports it. For example, and I'm sure you're aware of, it's a meta-analysis, isn't it, by Konkin? Pretty sure it's a meta-analysis. So, for example, studies have shown, or Konkin's meta-analysis has shown, that using the cognitive interview results in an increase in the amount of correct information given by witnesses. This is important because this increase in incorrect information shows that it's an effective way of supporting police investigations. Okay, so that's your kind of point, explain, conclude. How are we going to undermine that? Well, on the other hand, or despite this, yeah, signpost that discussion for the examiner. So despite this, studies or Konkin's research also showed that what happens is we get an increase in the amount of incorrect information as well. On balance, so let's bring it back together here because we're discussing it. On balance, despite getting more information, the overall quality of the information gained as a result of the cognitive interview may not actually be improved, and therefore maybe it isn't the most effective way or the best use of resources, you could argue, in a police investigation. Yeah, so we're getting more correct, but we're also getting more incorrect. So is it better overall? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, 8 marker, outline and evaluate the cognitive interview. No STEM or anything, 10 minutes, maybe a page, maybe a bit less if you've got small writing. Outline, probably 3 or 4 marks. Evaluate, 4 or 5 marks. Outline and evaluate, often 4 plus 4, but it could be literally half an essay, so 3 plus 5. You won't know on the day, so it doesn't really matter. But let's tackle these skills. So outline the cognitive interview. We did that earlier. So a general kind of statement about what it is and 2 or 3 techniques. And then for discussion, we're looking probably here for 2 discussion paragraphs. We've already covered those 2. I would just lift those straight as they were, and that's enough for an 8 marker. So the limitation being the practical side of it, and then the strength being research support. You could then undermine that to try and guarantee that level 4 if you've written it all up nicely. Okay. So how are we going to build this into a 16 marker? So obviously for the knowledge, you've got 6 marks of AO1 here. So you're going to start off with that, what is the cognitive interview? You're going to talk about the techniques. Let's elaborate this up a bit. Let's give examples of how an officer might use these techniques, what kind of questions they might ask, how they might speak to the witness, yeah? So that's your 6 marks of knowledge done. And then for these 10 AO3, 10 evaluation marks, we are probably going to do 3 discussion paragraphs. We've already got the limitation of the, cost or the practical side of it. We've already done the strength of the research support, but develop that with that counter argument of how you also get more wrong information. So we need one more point to add to this. What I'd probably go for is something about maybe individual differences. So I think this is a good one because there's a couple of points you could bring in to develop it. So where could we start, good or bad? Well, I'll tell you about kind of what the content of this discussion paragraph would be, and we'll go from there. So research has shown that older witnesses do benefit from using the cognitive interview, yeah, and that might be because maybe they lack a bit more confidence, because they're aware that their memory maybe isn't as good as it used to be, so they appreciate being given that time and that encouragement, but it also could be a more unconscious thing because those cues are going to support that memory. So we know that, but we also know that children, or young children especially, are going to really struggle with some of the techniques used in the cognitive interview, yeah? If you're interviewing, a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old and you're asking them to, talk about what happened but go backwards, they are probably going to quite, struggle with that. Similarly, some of the techniques used like change perspective, well, young children, and you'll know this if you do cognition development, if you talk about social cognition and perspective taking and all of that, young children can't actually perspective take according to research, until they're several years old. So asking them to talk about what happened from another person's point of view is just not going to work. So there's kind of a good and a bad there. So it depends which way you want to go for balance, but it doesn't really matter. You could just start off with saying one strength of the cognitive interview is that it's been shown to support older witnesses. You could talk about that. You could then counter-argue and say, despite this, research also suggests that it's not useful with young children, and talk about what I've just been through. And you could kind of bring that together and say, therefore, there are clear individual differences in the effectiveness of the cognitive interview, and this might undermine how effective it is in any one given investigation. I suppose you could argue that actually knowing that might help police to target when they use the cognitive interview, which actually might save resources. But that's up to you. That's part of your creativity and your own argument. Right, there you go. Okay, don't forget to reflect, even if you just take 30 seconds. What happened? Why? So what? How is this going to feed into your next steps and your ongoing revision and practice? All right. There you go. Hope that was useful for you guys. Keep going. See you in another video. Bish bash bosh.